Hi everyone, this is Stephanie Girding and I'll be your trainer for the webinar today. So welcome to Washington State Library's Planning and Promoting Technology Training. This is part of a series for the Accidental Technology Trainer, and this is the second of the 4 webinars. So I know some of you were with us last time when we did more of an introductory session, so welcome back. And those of you that didn't join us, that is fine as well. These are sort of independent, and I know they're all archived as well, so if you did miss one, you can go back and watch. So I am an independent library consultant. I'm based in Seattle, Washington, and I wrote a book a few years ago called The Accidental Technology Trainer, and that was basically because I was one and I kept meeting other people that fell into the same category. So a lot of us in the library world didn't intend to be doing technology training, but it definitely is a big need in our community, so a lot of us are doing that. So you do have your chat available to you, and I want you to feel free to use that throughout the webinar today. So if you have questions or comments, I definitely want us to really have a good time learning together today, so feel free to use that chat. If you haven't already shared in there, you're welcome to share where you are, what library you're at, where you're joining us from. And these are our training objectives for today. So by the end of this webinar, I hope you will know how to organize, design, and plan technology training. And we will talk about a lesson plan template that you can use, which is a really easy way to sort of organize the training that you're doing. And we'll talk about how to create learning objectives just like these and how you can really use those in your training as well. And then at the end, we'll talk a little bit more about promoting your technology training. So how can you make sure that people really know about it? So I see lots of you chiming in on the chat. We have mostly people from Washington, but we do have a few people from other states as well. So we've got Virginia and Indiana and Kentucky, looks like. Welcome to you all. Oregon, I think I saw. Wonderful. And quite a few, mostly were from Washington, I think. Maryland, okay, great. Virginia Beach, ooh, San Juan Island Library, okay. If you ever need me to come do some training for you. Okay, wonderful. Thank you all for sharing. Well, I'm sure that you have a lot of varied experience as far as technology training is concerned. So if you'll share in the chat, how long have you been doing technology training, whether it's accidental or not? See if you can figure that out, add that up. For me, yeah, the last time I added it up, it kind of scared me. So when I started doing technology training was actually in library school, and one of the first things that I did was I was, you know, one of the younger ones at the library where I was working, and so they made me the department email trainer because we were getting email and using email for the first time. And it was before we even had graphical browsers, and I remember doing an in-service training for teachers and using links and trying to tell them this was going to be the wave of the future. So it's been a while for me. And definitely any kind of technology training you're doing counts. So even if it's answering one-on-one questions from people who come into your library, if they're asking you how to send email, those kind of things, I count that as technology training as well. So it looks like from the chat we've got a lot of different experience. 1 year, 4 years, 3 months. Okay, congratulations, Dada. 2 years, over a year, 12 years, okay, good. Mary and Anita, 12 to 13 years. You have some experience on here. Good. All right, so definitely some varied experience, some people that are very new trainers and some that have been doing this for a while. Oh, good, we've got 26 years now. So definitely let's learn from each other. So those of you that have been doing this for a while, feel free to add your tips and comments in as we go along. And those of you that are new, feel free to ask your questions as well. We can always learn from each other. All right, and Leanne has over 20 years too. Okay, great. So I wanted to share a study that I saw recently to make us feel a little bit better about this, that technology can be good for us. So I have a 6-year-old, and there's been a lot of talk in her school about, whether technology is good for kids or not. But definitely there's a lot of studies around the fact that for adults, technology can be good for us. So there's a big study by the Center on Aging at UCLA, and they found that web-savvy 55 to 76-year-olds have twice the brain activation in areas associated with decision-making and reasoning. So much more so than people that were searching online that weren't very used to technology. And that when you're doing Googling, when you're online, your neural activation is higher than when reading a book. So that being online and, everything that we're learning and doing while we're doing that might be sort of like exercise for our brain. So that made me feel a little bit better about all the time that I end up spending online. And so the training cycle, this was something that I came up with just to organize what we're talking about and doing. So in our first webinar, we talked about training plans and needs assessments. And so this week, we're going to be really looking at workshop planning and learning objectives. And then for our webinar next month, we'll be looking at learning activities, how to make things really interactive, the learning experience itself, so when you're really there with people doing the training. And then for our last webinar, we will be looking at evaluation and how to improve training, how to measure results, all of those good things. So for today, really focusing on the actual planning of the training. And I do call it workshop planning, but I really mean any kind of training that you're doing, because you can definitely use this whether you're doing online training or even one-on-one training. So I'm a big fan of planning, and sometimes I know we feel like we have so much going on in our libraries that we don't have enough time to plan. So I love this quote. I think this is a Buddhist quote. We have very little time, therefore we must proceed very slowly. And really thinking about the fact that when we do plan, it actually cuts down how much time it takes to do things going forward. So taking a little time to organize things can actually save us time in the long run. So being really thoughtful about what we're doing. So we talked last time a lot about planning training programs, but now really thinking a little bit more about that and just thinking about, what does need to be done to get your training program from what it is now to really where you want it to be and where your community needs it to be. So thinking about that. And I think it's really important as we think about that to realize that we can take baby steps to get there, that we don't have to, we might have these grand plans of where we want to get our community, but just by those little baby steps, we can really make a big difference in that. So just as a little bit of thinking about trying to do that planning, really thinking about putting it in writing what you're going to be doing. So doing really basic training plans, making sure that you've got a training mission, that you really think about what you're trying to do in your libraries. Are you trying to do training for your staff, for the public? Really thinking through that and making sure that you do take the time to find out what's needed by your staff and what's needed by your public as well. And then really exploring setting goals and objectives. So how are you going to get there? And then we'll talk a little bit too today about sort of the nitty-gritty. So how do we plan, what we're going to be doing and scheduling and all of those sort of things. And then always important as you're making any kind of plan to really think about those outcomes. What change are you trying to make, and how are you going to know whether you're successful or not? And part of a good training plan is always including any policies or procedures that you need to make sure that staff understand what they need to do, what procedures they need to follow, any of those sort of things. And then good policies that can be relied on as well. So I've worked a lot with TechSoup for libraries, and one of the things we're working on is working with the Library Edge program, which I'll be talking more about in just a little while. But this was one of the librarians that we interviewed, and she had some really interesting things to say. This was from an interview that we did with her, and it's published on TechSoup, which I've got the link down below. Making technology training a priority and a job requirement. So she said, really trying to find out what your community wants and needs are. Because if you're doing things that they don't want, then it's not really worth spending your limited resources on it. So really thinking about the fact that, times are tight right now, budgets are tight, and we can't always do everything for everyone, but really instead thinking about, well, what things can we do really well, and really prioritizing, using those resources really wisely. And then she also advocates for really making sure that all staff members really understand why you're doing what you're doing. So what is it that your community really needs? Do they need help finding jobs? Do they need help learning to read? Do they need help with teens that are dropping out of school or getting into trouble, those kind of things? And then really letting your staff know these are the things, these are the big problems in our community we're helping solve, and this is how we're doing it. And then really setting an expectation, getting that buy-in from them. So just sort of a step-by-step when you're thinking about developing staff and public training plans. So one thing with staff I think that's really important is having some kind of technology competencies, and really thinking about, depending on who the staff member is, what's required for their job. And it may be at your library you want everyone to be able to have a certain level of technology knowledge. If you're at a smaller library, you're going to be wearing a lot of different hats, and so those competencies are going to be different maybe. At a larger library that you might have a lot of different technology competencies, a lot of different staff positions. And then really trying to figure out what do they know, where are they at? And the same thing for your community as well, finding out what their needs are. And then really developing training plans for your staff to make sure that they can do what they need to do, but then also for your community. And thinking about all the different ways that you can offer technology training to your libraries. So it may be something like a more formal workshop or class, or it may be something that's more an independent learning. So one of the libraries that I worked with in Arizona, they had a wonderful program for their staff where they had their staff set their own goals every year on what they wanted to learn about. And then they had to do a little learning plan and figure out how they were going to learn these things. So this was really great because people do learn, as we talked about last time, different ways. And so how can we accommodate that? And so maybe it's that they wanted to attend workshops, or maybe it's that they wanted to read books about it, or just, get in and try out some new things. And then after they came up with their plan, they would meet with their manager and get that approved and get that staff time that they could use to be able to learn. And so it really became a great way for them to really develop a learning community. And I think in these times, we really have to think about the fact that there really is lifelong learning going on, especially with technology. Things just change so fast that you really do have to just keep learning all of the time. And really trying to make that clear to your staff and also to your community members as well. I know one of the things that we get sometimes is we have people coming in who, want us to do it for them, and trying to get that mentality across that we all have to really practice and get used to just learning as we're going, because it definitely does always change. So then thinking through sort of the project management sort of things, scheduling the training, and then making sure that within your library's budget that training is included. So I know for some of you this can sometimes be a struggle, but I think that that's a very important part of it as well, to really make sure your staff and public training is included in any planning that your library is doing, and really trying to work towards building those learning organizations. So share in the chat if you have a technology plan, whether for your staff or your public training, and any tips that you all have. Those of you that have been doing this for a while, do you have any tips on writing those plans or setting competencies with your staff, doing assessments? All right, and some of you don't have any plan. Yep, just a calendar. And that's not too unusual, but I do think that, just spending, again, just a little time to really think through what you're doing and why you're doing it can really make a big difference. Okay, and Christina said they're encouraged to use WebJunction. Okay, great community for the library world there. So there are some great examples, and one of them is on WebJunction for technology competencies for staff. So if that is something that you're interested in looking at more, there's some great examples already out there. So WebJunction has a really thorough one, the Public Access Computing Technology Competencies. So it includes a lot of different competencies on there. And then Colorado State Library recently came up with competencies for technology trainers, so just for technology training skills. So that's a really good one to take a look at too. I always think that that's good for us to, sort of look at our own selves as far as technology training is concerned, and what can we work at and get better at. Then also the EDGE initiative, if you haven't heard about it yet, is a technology assessment. So it has a tool that libraries can take online that kind of assesses everything that you're doing at your library. And then it has benchmarks. So it really lets you know sort of where you are, where your library is as far as comparing it to other libraries and to really best practices. And then there's a website that has tools and resources. And so this whole project is currently being piloted by a number of libraries, and I think they hope to officially launch it at the beginning of the year next year. So definitely keep your ear open for that. Leanne just shared they do book a librarian one-on-one training. Yeah, and that's definitely, as I said, that's a part of technology training as well. And I think it's great doing that scheduling as well. Okay, and Donna said they're already using the EDGE benchmarks for planning library training for the public. Wonderful, good. All right, and Darcy said Oregon Library Association is adopting the EDGE initiative in a form for their public library standards. Oh, that's really interesting. I'd love to hear more about that. Great. And Anita said for planning, they're using requests gathered from the public evaluations from each class to add to or revise the class. Very good, yeah. Okay, and volunteer tech one-on-one trainers, good. On the spot training, yeah, I like that. Okay, very good. And that's for staff training, the on the spot training. Very good. You know, sometimes I hear about that for public training, but not as much for staff training, so that's a really good idea as well. All right, so also in this TechSoup Spotlight, with Alexis. She actually she is at a small library, she's a small library director, and she put technology skills in everyone's job description, and they count for 30% of their evaluations. So she basically said when she implemented this, she just scheduled a meeting with each employee, and when they walked into her office, she said, "Here's your test, you have 2 hours." And she said it was kind of surprising for them, but she told them, you know, they wouldn't be penalized for what they didn't know, but she just had to know where they were at so she could figure out how to get them all to the same level of training. And just that at her library, she feels it's really important that everybody does have basic technology training skills, which I think is really great. So just really thinking about that this whole issue is definitely a journey, and by really making sure that everybody has a really big picture of what's going on and that they know what they're working towards. So, you know, if you are the trainer at your library, making sure that your leadership and administration really understand what you're doing and that training is part of your strategic planning. And then trying to really keep everybody involved at your library, letting them know what you're working towards and how not only will they benefit by learning the technology, but how the community benefits as well. I think sometimes we are so focused on what we're doing and we're seeing results and we're seeing that we're making a difference in people's lives, but making sure that everybody at our library understands that as well. And then, you know, of course, I always think library staff is our most valuable resource in our library. So making sure that that investment is being made in that most valuable resource is important. So let's talk a little bit about who's doing the training in your library. So let us know in the chat, do you do all the training yourself? Do you have volunteers that help or partners that you work with? There's lots of different people that you can partner with, or using volunteers to help can be really good. Having people pair up together is a great idea, whether it's having staff members pair up to be learning partners, or having some kind of match-up within for your community members. I've seen a lot of libraries have a lot of success with teens and seniors. The teens are really great at knowing the technology, and with a little training they can be good at helping teach that to other people as well. And then I've also seen teens and seniors really work with library trainers. So maybe the librarian is doing the training, but they have a volunteer teen or a volunteer senior who's in the room with them, who's helping them out, you know, which is great if you have some different skill levels in your training. Having somebody else that can really help with that can be great. Or even, as some of you said, having having volunteers available for scheduling appointments or doing that one-on-one training as well. And of course with teens, sometimes they need to have a community service component with their school, so that might be a way to reach out to them as well, having them do some training that way. And then also looking at other organizations within your community. So within your government, you know, other city departments, your nonprofits that are around in your community, or businesses or other educational colleges, universities to think about as well. And I've also seen some libraries that have had teachers volunteer in the summer, or, you know, professional trainers that are willing to volunteer with that as well. So thinking about that. And then I've had some libraries that are close to each other, whether different types of libraries, or sometimes, you know, there's a city system and a county system, partnering together and training trainers and topics. You know, it might be that you have trainers that are really good at teaching Office, but maybe they don't know some of the emerging technology skills as much, so doing some training with that as well. Okay, so looking at the chat a little bit here. So some of you are using volunteers. Oh, Lynn said volunteer tech docent. That's a great idea, Lynn, if you could tell us more about that. I really like the sound of that. Okay, Michelle said she's at offers for volunteers. Okay, good. Yeah, and if you're new to using that, like I said, just have them come while you're teaching, and just they can kind of help. If somebody gets stuck in a class, or even if somebody's more advanced, they can kind of sit down with them maybe and answer some questions as well. All right. A trained pool, I don't know who S is, but they use a trained pool of volunteers for computer classes and one-to-one. Wonderful. Yeah, and sometimes when you're thinking about using these volunteers, it is important to sort of treat them as staff members. So providing them with training and making sure that they know the policies and procedures that you have. Really good. All right, and Leanne shared that she does the majority of the training but has experts from the community come in as well. That's a great idea. Yeah, sometimes, even doing different topic-based training can be good, doing subject-specific ones and having experts come in. So you might be doing a training on investing online or something, and you might not know a lot about that, but having somebody partner with a club that does that sort of thing, or an investment professional, and having them come in and sort of teach the topic part of it for you can be a really good way to go. Okay, good. Lots of great sharing in here. Okay, and Linda also said they have a dedicated work experience employee, tech assistant for 20 hours a week. Oh, that's really great. Yeah, and also teaching at the community college, and sometimes that can be a great way for a partnership as well, having them teach as well at your library. Good. All right, thank you all for that sharing. So lots of good ideas. And then thinking about who you're training at your library. So do any of you have specific classes for different age groups or different interests? Share that in the chat. So I think that this can be an interesting way to organize your training as well, to really think about, well, who needs the training? Who's coming in and asking a lot of questions? And even organizing your training around that, the people that you're reaching out to. So maybe you want to do specific classes for seniors or for people that are looking for jobs. Or I've even seen some libraries do training for business people that maybe they do during lunchtime. Even doing things like how to create a business card, and then they create a business card and print those during the training. Just a good way to sort of do outreach a little bit to other community groups. Okay, so they have outreach at the local secondary schools on database searching. Great, yeah. Okay, in business. Oh, workshops for businesses for their employees. We have a mobile lab to go on site. Wonderful. Yeah, that's a great way to do it, really getting out there in the community. Okay, great. And Beth said they taught a class on the foundation directory to nonprofit staff, so helping them learn tools for getting funding. Wonderful. And Curtis says they have a seniors basic computer, e-reader, smartphones, and summer class for our youth. Okay, great ideas. So I know, one of the things that I think is really interesting is, as I said, I've been doing technology training for a long time. I was actually one of the Gates Foundation trainers that brought computers around, sometimes the first public access computers, to communities around the U.S. And, I'm always amazed that we're still teaching some of the same skills. We still have people coming into our libraries who don't know how to use a mouse, or who are typing their first email and those sort of things. And I always feel like, haven't we already trained everyone on this? It's really amazing. But we do need to keep offering that and keep those basic skills going if that's what our community members need, of course. But then I think also mixing in some different topics that you can do as well. This can be a great way to really reach out to other members of your community and also just to kind of keep your staff on the cutting edge of what's going on and to make things more interesting for us as technology trainers as well. So these are some interesting topics I've seen, and if you want to add in the chat any that you all do as well. The first one I thought was a great idea. I just need 3 sources by tomorrow. And this came from a library who, kept having students come into the library and say, I need help with this research paper, and they would want to show them how to do it, and they'd say, yeah, whatever, I just need 3 sources by tomorrow. They didn't want to learn it. But so what they did was they really went through the process of developing a plan, a learning plan, and a handout on, what to do, where to look, and those sort of things, and really organized this into a real training plan so that any time if somebody did come in with this question that they could easily do the training with them. Fantastic freebies for everyone is one. I think they even offered it on Fridays, Princeton Public Library. So this is one example, the Fun with Flickr. But they just do all kinds of different free online sources for, there's just about everything that you can do now, whether it's using Flickr or Prezi or any of those sort of things that we can get lost in sometimes, learning and doing, but just a quick class every week on some of those things. And if you haven't heard about 23 Things yet, All Together Now is one that was done for the school libraries, but just a nice way for training to occur that people can just do on their own and do self-paced. So this was learning 23 different things kind of more related to social technologies. But just organizing that sort of training or even pointing people towards that, whether it's for your staff or even having your community going as well. Okay, Darcy said there's 23 mobile things now too. Yeah, definitely. So really looking at that. And then even, doing things like taking pictures and showing people how to upload those to Facebook, getting those profile pictures ready. That can be a good thing, especially for some of the older patrons that are still learning some of those technologies. So I won't go into detail on all of these. You can ask me if you have questions on any of the other ones. Yeah, Dolores said online shopping. Yeah, that's a great one. I've seen libraries even do eBay and those kind of things, Craigslist, Microsoft mailings before the holiday for holiday card mailings. Oh, that would be great. I feel like the holidays I always have to relearn mail merge and those sort of things. So very good to have it topic related. Okay, good. Anything else you want to share? Any interesting classes that you're doing? How about, well, let's talk a little bit about what topics are you offering. So besides those, what other things are you offering? Are you really focused on the basics at your library? What are your most common topics that you're teaching? And I know a lot of you are doing e-reader training these days. Yep, iPad and Kindle Fire, Pinterest, the basics in e-readers and tablets, mouse, email, e-readers, a lot on Facebook. Great. Yeah, I had somebody recently in a class saying that they held a Facebook class and nobody came. But, some of that is just community-based. Other people have waiting lists for Facebook classes, right? Windows 8, Microsoft Access, Kindle, yeah, definitely. Lots on e-readers, library downloadables, Windows navigation, file sharing, smartphone class always fills the room, Caitlin says. Great. Saving your work, how to save to flash drives. Yeah, sometimes even doing a class just around a topic like that can be a really great help for people. Gmail, beginning computers, internet safety, Twitter, One-on-one appointments, good. Photo management, yeah. Yep, one-on-one help. Yeah, and again, that's something that I see that's really community-based. There are some communities that really love one-on-one help and others that don't. So I think that that's always interesting. I always wonder, what is it that really affects that? Library and computer maintenance, wonderful, yeah. Internet vocabulary session, I like that. Yeah, Caitlin said everyone's shocked that our one-on-one help is free. Yeah, that's true. Maybe people need to advertise that part of it more. They don't realize that it's free. Yeah, and that's one of the things I love about working in libraries is that we get to offer all of this at no charge. Okay, let's keep moving along here. So another thing to think about, of course, is when you're going to be offering the training. So you can share in the chat too when you offer the training what you found works. I've seen some smaller libraries especially offer classes when the library's closed, so maybe before or after. They don't have room for everybody or don't have a computer lab. And then just thinking about your community, are there evening slots that might be better for people that are working all day, and then maybe doing things at home, during the day for people that are at home, working from home, or stay-at-home parents, or people that are retired, those lunchtime sessions or quick sessions. Monday mornings at 11 because most of the interested attendees are elderly retired patrons. Okay, Sarah said they do short one-on-one sessions in the morning before the library opens. Wonderful. Saturday morning for e-readers, weekday classes for computer basics are mostly for seniors. For e-readers, evening classes. Yeah, the lunchtime sessions, and they get a long lunch break. Good, good. Yeah, and I think sometimes, figuring out what works for your community and who you're trying to reach out to, doing a variety of these can often be really helpful. Okay, so let's go into more talking about planning the actual training, whether it's a workshop or this also works for really trying to think about planning your one-on-one training as well. So some different parts is, of course you want a title for your training, something that people will understand. You can have it be something catchy, but also think about that sometimes, people don't understand what some of the terminology means. So, you might say that it's a class on Flickr, but if people don't know what Flickr is, then really trying to be a little more descriptive and letting them know about online photo sharing, those sort of things. Then thinking about really who's that target audience, what are their skill levels, who is this class focused on, how long is this class going to be? And I see classes that are 10 minutes long to classes that are 2 hours long to even all-day classes sometimes. So really trying to think about that. And this does really work to plan the one-on-one training. So really just thinking about, okay, this is a 10-minute long class that we're going to teach if somebody has questions on how to set up an email account or something like that you get a lot of questions around. But really thinking through that, getting it in writing, it just makes it a lot easier each time when you go to have to answer that question and do that quick training. We'll talk more about developing those goals and objectives. And then the description, really just writing a paragraph about what's covered. This can be a great thing to use in your plan, but then it's also what you can use for your marketing as well. And then really thinking through the timing, which we'll talk more about, how you're going to evaluate the class, and then do you want to have handouts, are there any supplies and those sort of things needed. So having a workshop plan, and we'll send around a template that you can use as well for this. But this can be really great because you can share this with other library staff members so that you don't have to really reinvent the wheel every time. But it's also good as a trainer just so you remember, maybe there's a class that you only teach once a month or once every 6 months. So really getting it down and doing this planning first is really helpful for you when you go back and do the training again. So this is a workshop plan template, and you will find this used. I did a project with WebJunction where we used this and people uploaded their workshop plan templates using this. So you might see this being used in other places. I think Colorado uses it some as well. And so this is just one for a day-long accidental technology training class, so you can see what it looks like when it's filled out. And I'm going to talk a little bit now about how to plan your training as far as your learning objectives are concerned. I'll go back to that slide in just a moment. But the learning objectives are one part that I think really changed my training when I figured out how to use them. So really coming up with just a few things that you want people to be able to do or think or feel as a result of going through the training, really being specific about that. So, for example, when I worked at the Gates Foundation, we often did 2 days of training and showing people, you know, everything on their computer, how to maintain the computer, how to, you know, access all the programs that many of them were new to them, you know, whether it was office programs or kids programs, all of those things. But really, at the end of the day, we wanted them to be able to turn the computer on, log the computer in, and then be able to shut it off at the end of the day. So those were our 3 real things that we wanted them to be able to do at the end of the 2-day training. Because a lot of these libraries were using these computers for the very first time, and we realized, you know, we could do all this training, but if we leave and they don't know how to turn them on themselves, then that's a problem. So that was something that we repeated throughout our time together so that we could really get them to that point. So really thinking about just what are those top things, and this really helps you when you're planning your training. I was working with a trainer who was developing a class on searching on the internet, and he started with a history of the internet, going all the way back to the very beginning, you know, when it was DARPA and how the first computers got connected, all of this. And, you know, I was like, this is, you know, interesting and probably really interesting to you, but it takes up 15 minutes of your hour-long class. And what is it that you really want them to walk away knowing how to do? Do you want them to be able to open a browser? Do you want them to be able to type a URL in? Do you want them to be able to go to a search screen and do a basic search? You know, maybe those are the 3 things that you really want to focus on for this class. And maybe the history of the internet isn't something that you really have time for when you're working with new learners. So when you're writing these objectives, I found that using these behavioral verbs really help. So this is part of Bloom's taxonomy, and I won't go into all the nitty-gritty about that, but this is a way to just measure how people learn. So it kind of goes into starting with just basic knowledge, that can people define terms and list how they would use things and those things, all the way up to really, you know, being able to use it in their life and being able to critique what they're doing and those sort of more advanced skills. But I found that this is a really good way to write your learning objectives to make sure that people are really going to be able to do them. So I'll give you an example of a class that I did, how I used this. So this was for a 3-hour beginning emerging technology workshop. And so as part of this, for their learning objectives, they need to be able to list 3 reasons that they would use social software, define some terms, explain examples, have time to practice using them, and then by the end that they would really feel more confident and comfortable. So this was for staff training, and I did this twice in one day. So I had a morning session and an afternoon session. And so this gets to what I call organized flexibility. So what that really means is that you can plan and you can come up with these learning objectives that you want to make sure that you accomplish, but sometimes the way that you get to these objectives can be different depending on who you're training. So the morning group that I had, everybody was really talkative and really engaged. When I started off the class, I decided I would show them some of the technology, show them a blog, show them a wiki, and those sort of things, and get them familiar with using them first and just sort of, defining what they were, and then have them practice creating their own. So as I was showing them the different examples, people would say, oh, have you read this blog? Let's take a look at this blog. And so they were calling out different examples, and one of the libraries had a staff wiki, and so we looked at that. So we ended up spending a lot more time on that one activity than I had planned. But then when we came to, we still had time for them to practice using the tools and that sort of thing. And the evaluations were good. They all learned these different objectives. But then for the afternoon class, it was just a very different group, which I always think group dynamics are so interesting. But with this group, they were quieter. When I showed examples, no one volunteered other examples. So that part went really fast, and we ended up having more time for them to practice. So what I did was I had them each either create something or, add to a wiki, any of those sort of things, create a blog. And then we had time for show and tell. So we basically had them go around the room and leave up on their computer screens something that they wanted to show or something that they'd created. So we had a little extra time for doing that. So that's what I mean by organized flexibility. You want to get there, but how you get there might be different just depending on who's in the room with you and what their skill levels are and how interactive they are, any of those sort of things. So you do have to adjust things a little. So one of the ways that's really good to do this is to really chunk things, chunk your training that you're going to be doing when you're organizing it into 10 to 15-minute segments. So really thinking about bite size. So all of those different learning objectives, I have had different activities planned for what they would do and how they would learn. And then, you can kind of change things based on what you need to do. And maybe it's you end up with an advanced group and you can go into an advanced activity. We'll talk more in the next webinar about some ways that you can really make things interactive for people by using these modules. So making sure that you do things like have time, have one 15-minute segment where it's them on the computer experiencing and doing it for themselves, I think is a really important thing to think about. The other thing that this is great about using these modules is primacy recency, which means that people remember the beginnings and endings of things. Oh, sorry, Beth, I'm making Beth hungry. People remember the beginning and ends of things more. So people will remember the beginning of your class and the end of the class. But by chunking your information into 10 to 15-minute segments where you're really making some kind of change, whether it's 10 minutes where you're showing them things and 10 minutes where they're working on their own, you create more of these beginnings and endings. So that really helps people to learn and to remember differently as well. And we'll talk more about this, as I said, in our next webinar as well, developing those modules and really thinking through what that means. So I think an important thing is when you're building these modules that you look at those learning objectives and then you tie those modules to those different activities that you develop. So some of the objectives was for this emerging technology class was that they could list and discuss social networking tools and then determine the best uses for their library. So with this, instead of going through definitions and defining things so that they would understand the terminology, I had them use bingo as a fun way to learn this. So I had all the different definitions, I had all the different terms as bingo cards, and you can get free online bingo cards. If you Google that, there's some great websites where you just type your terms in and then it'll create different bingo cards that you can print out. So what I did was I just basically pulled a term out of the hat, and then what people had to do is they had to define it and tell how they used it in their library or what experience they had with it. And then they could all mark off a space. So this really turned it around on them to provide the definition, but also to share how they were using it, which was really interesting. And definitely I got better definitions than if I had just stood up there and defined all of these for themselves. So this is exactly what we're going to be talking about in our next workshop, is how can we sort of build some fun in and some activities where we really make sure that people learn in the best way that they can. And this is just a bigger picture of that workshop plan template again, but you can see a little bit down here the modules. So really just trying to chunk all that information that you'll be doing, I think, is an important part of this. And so, as I said, we will send this out to you all. So I do want to spend just a few minutes talking about handouts. So let me know in the chat how you use handouts at your library. Do you use handouts? Do you print them, or do you just refer them online? And where do you get your handouts? Do you create them yourself? Do you use ones that are already out there? Okay, boring reproductions of PowerPoint slides. Okay, using handouts as reminders for information. Created themselves. Okay, a take-home review and guide. Screenshots and tutorials. Having them near reference, that's a great thing. So if people do want more information. Links to archive materials. Trying to move to be more online. All right, copies of what Washington State Library has provided for e-readers. There you go, that's a good plug. You might want to share that link, Joe or Diane, if you have one. Okay, very good. Yeah, so I think, thinking about how you want to handle this. I know I used to provide so many handouts for the classes that I teach, and I just felt bad for the trees. So I've definitely scaled back on that. Sometimes people do like to have something that they can reference later. I've seen some libraries that are just emailing this out after a class is over with, so that can be something that you do instead of having to print them out each time. Okay, and Marta said they use information from Overdrive, digitallearn.org. Okay, I'm going to share that one in just a minute too. Yeah. So really thinking about, I think we used to spend so long developing handouts, but now there are a lot of things that are online that we can just modify ourselves as well. I've also seen some libraries that, will provide sort of advanced information in a handout form. But I think also, we talked last time about learning styles and how people learn, realizing that even if you provide handouts, some people are going to need to take notes and going to need to write things down their own way in the way that they'll remember it. Something else that you can do is kind of have an interactive handout. So where you just put in some of the information and then they can fill in the rest of it themselves. So something that's sort of part of the learning as you go along, that can be a really good idea as well. So I think another thing to really think about is how we're getting the word out about our technology training. So I know I hear from some libraries that have waiting lists of people wanting to get into classes and others that have a hard time getting people in. So share in the chat what you do to get the word out about your technology training classes, and whether you have a lot of people trying to get to your classes or whether you're still trying to build them. Okay, Caitlin says our local paper puts it out in press releases, word of mouth. Okay, good. Yeah, and I think the important thing is to just, try to tell everybody, try to get it out any way that you can. advertise on the website and in the libraries, local paper and library postings, library Facebook, good, yeah, social media, press releases around town and in the library, good. Speaking at the hot lunch at the senior center, wonderful, really getting out there. Okay, good, yeah. Yeah, I think it's good to kind of put it out, you know, through our normal library methods, but then also thinking about how can we reach people who aren't coming into the library as well. So giving out flyers, those sort of things. There's a library in Arizona that is a smaller library, and they went to their local cafe and asked them if they could provide the paper placemats at the cafe. And so what they do is they print that on long paper and have the computer class schedule printed on there every month. I thought that was a great idea for really getting some outreach, and they have people that come in with these classes circled with sticky syrup on them and that sort of thing. Very interesting. Grocery store, the coffee shop. Okay, great, good. All right, so I always think, you know, great for us to be at the table, you know, even better if we provide the table. So definitely thinking about how you can partner with different organizations as well as far as your technology training is going on. And there's an example that I'll share of a library, the Greenville County Library System in South Carolina, that just really thought through all the different ways that they could help their libraries, and they're one of the EDGE pilot libraries as well. And just are doing so many different partnerships. So partnering for job assessment preparation with a state program, small business support, student support, partnering with a local agency to create a story time for children with autism, and then a senior health information project. So this is another spotlight on TechSoup for libraries as well that you can look at to get more ideas about. But I think that just a really good way to think about how can we extend some of the training that we're doing with our technology. So there are a lot of free training resources out there, so I do think it's very good to look and see what's already out there. So definitely share in the chat if you have other training resources, other places that you go to look for this sort of information. The Web Junction definitely has a lot. They've got a technology training section that does have a lot of classes that have been uploaded using that workshop planning template. And there's some new ones too. The Colorado Virtual Library has their tech training outlines. The Goodwill Community Foundation has a lot of information available. PLA's digitallearn.org that was mentioned earlier. Yeah, good. Any others? Anything else you would add to this list? All right, any questions or concerns? Any questions we didn't answer as far as planning and promoting technology training is concerned? Anything else you want us to cover in the upcoming ones? Let us know in the chat. And just as a little review, so thinking about really trying to plan your technology training program, thinking through all of those steps, using that organized flexibility, really using learning objectives to try to figure out what exactly you want people to come away with, how you're going to get across that, using those partnerships, and then really trying to tell everybody about the training that you do. So I'll close with this couple of quotes. One is that technology doesn't determine the quality of the connection, only you can do that, which was said by Melinda Gates. So I think that this is really an important thing to think about with our technology training, that it's really about the people, it's not about the technology. So doing what we can to best meet the needs of the people that we're working with is very important. So thank you all for attending and being here today and sharing so much in the chat as well. And Washington State Library just shared that they have new digital literacy resources as well. So thank you for that, and thank you for supporting this webinar today, too.
And thank you, Stephanie, for a very informative program. Really learned a lot from it. And we did record it, so if you want to revisit the webinar, it will be up on our website. And thank you all for coming today. It's just a great time learning a lot. Thanks, Stephanie.
Wonderful, thank you. Someone asked when the next webinar was. I think the next one is October 9th.
That sounds about right.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Okay, thank you.